guys, welcome back to another episode of Her Faith Inspires podcast, where we take cultural issues and align them to biblical truth. I am going to tell you that with my guest today, I'm probably fangirling a little too much because I have read Hillary's book, Mama Bear Apologetics, and you've heard me talk about this so many times that I just love what she has to say. My highlighter came out. I was highlighting everything, writing things down, trying to remember it, and then just having to go back and reference it in so many different things that I've been talking about on the podcast over the last year and a half since I read it. And now she has a new book out, Mama Bear Apologetics Guide to Sexuality. And so I am very, very thankful that she's here with us today. Hillary is the founder of Mama Bear Apologetics. She has a burden for providing accessible apologetics resources for busy moms. And she has a master's in biology, and her specialties are in cultural apologetics, the relationship between science and faith, and understanding the root causes of doubt. And I also want you to know the proper way to pronounce her name is Hillary Morgan Ferrer. And do not get that wrong, because now that I know that it's how you say it, whenever I hear her on another podcast, I'm like, you got to say it right. If you don't say it right, now I'm going to notice. And anyways, Hillary, thank you for being here today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Yes. So before we get into all the questions and stuff like that, you seem so credentialed, and even reading whenever I listen to you, I even listen to your recent podcast with Frank Turek and, like I said, Ali Stuckey. And so I'm always kind of listening to what you have to say, and you provide so much depth to these conversations. We think of parenting and motherhood as, for me, when I thought of motherhood, I just thought baby bottles, changing diapers, and singing the ABCs. And we're just not there, anymore. How long have you been speaking into this topic, and how long have you been into the whole apologetics realm?
So I've been into apologetics since I was about 12. That was when it was introduced to me. And it was introduced to me by a pastor from the pulpit that he did two series. One of them was a series on evidences for the resurrection. And one of them was a series on the reliability of New Testament documents. So some of the just the real basic information, basic apologetics, I would call it, the basic evidential apologetics. And that would have been probably around 8th grade for me. But I remember just my whole world changing at that point, because I'd always been the good Christian girl, and I knew that I wanted to follow Jesus, and I knew that, I was his and he was mine. But I didn't have this sense of, this is objectively true and can withstand any kind of scrutiny that someone throws at it. And so at that point, it became, I kind of joke, I think I have this book, for real's true. You think sometimes as a kid, you're you believe it's true, but then there's this different level of believing that it's true. And so when I had that just changed my life. So I kind of went off to college and ended up doing a bunch of other stuff. And it wasn't until I met my husband that I started remembering my love of apologetics. And those are kind of the conversations. He had just finished his MDiv at Southern Evangelical in apologetics and biblical languages, and he was going on to his PhD in philosophy of religion. And so the conversations that we had, especially I joke about our pillow talk is very different than other people. It just kind of got me back in that world and got me thinking along those lines. And at some point, I had a girl that told me about why she was targeting women for targeting. It sounds like you're you know what I mean.
Right. I know what you mean.
And I was like, well, why do women need this special apologetics? I don't understand, because, this has never prevented me from doing apologetics. And she said, well, there's a large demographic out there who won't read something unless it's written by a woman for a woman. And that just blew my mind. I was like, what? This happens. And all of a sudden, all those women's ministries that I had never been involved with made a little bit more sense. I always knew that I kind of didn't fit in there, and I never, fully knew why. I knew that I don't know, I was more comfortable with men and more comfortable with guys. And I just assumed it was because I was so close to my dad. But once I realized this, all of a sudden I was like, oh yeah, we definitely need to reach the women. But the first thing that really came to my mind was, who's reaching the moms? And I the moms to me are that's the apologist that everybody should have in their home, because moms get more questions, especially moms of young kids, get more questions than the Queen of England does in an interview. And this was an actual study that was done that, saying that moms of young children get more questions than the Queen of England does in an interview. And so when they have spiritual questions, who are they going to first? They are going to mom. And I think Amy did some kind of survey. She found a survey of like this list of things where kids were asked, who do you go to first to ask? And like in every single topic, mom was the first one that they would go ask until it was politics. Politics, they'd ask dad first, but everything else, it was mom. So that was when I thought, we need to have something for moms, that I felt immediately like the Lord had called the wrong person, because it definitely almost felt like a calling. And part of me was like, yeah, who can I get to do this? And, it was clear that this was the ministry that the Lord wanted me to start. And I kind of asked the Lord, I think you have the wrong person, because for a variety of reasons, I can't have kids adopted or natural. It's not a wise thing just with my health. Wouldn't be fair to the kids. So I thought that was going to make it to where nobody really cared what I had to say in this. And the Lord sort of told me, well, you've got something that most moms don't have, which is time to research. And so I thought, that's true. I do have that. And so I decided that this was going to be the way that I would fulfill that still yearning for motherhood that I had, was if I could help other moms who are so busy by preparing all this information, because I love to study, I love to learn. And if I could put it in a way that was easy to digest and easy to do while they're, burping their baby at the same time, because let's face it, moms are masters of multitasking. So you can, they can understand a university lecture, no problem. But I've tried doing the dishes and listening to some of those lectures, and I can't do them both at the same time. So yeah, I just wanted to make something to where it was easy to understand, to where it broke it down. There's a whole different level when you're breaking something down in order for you to talk to young children about this. I remember when I was like maybe 14, and I had gone on a mission trip, and they'd asked me and my sister to go talk to the elementary kids about our mission trip. And all of a sudden I realized all these words that I was using, these kids had no idea what these words were. That was my first taste of saying, breaking stuff down for kids is a lot harder than just relaying your own experiences or relaying your own research. I taught for many years, and the final part of my teaching was specifically with kids with learning disabilities. So I had to almost learn where they were developmentally and what things would make sense to them, what things didn't make sense to them. Like if you describe it in this way, it won't connect. If you give them an analogy, they'll understand. Or if you give them lots of examples of something, they'll understand and they can draw that bigger conclusion. So all these different things that you normally don't see in apologetics, on really training people how to break it down for their children. That I thought that's what the moms need. It's like they don't need it just for themselves. They need to know how to break it down, how to have these conversations with their kids. And that's just a whole different skill set. So really that's been my goal since the beginning with moms, is I wanted to have a lot of audio stuff, just because I think a lot of moms listen while multitasking. Since having my surgery in May, we haven't been as good with the podcast, but we're hoping to get back into those. But yeah, then just breaking stuff down so that mom understands it and she knows how to break it down to kid language. Those are the two things.
It's exactly what we need as moms, because, and I said this when I began this episode, some people think of motherhood as, and I was guilty of this, because being a teacher, I kind of wanted to start my career, and I kind of kept looking out this window of, gosh, everybody's passing me by and I'm still here sitting on my credential, taking care of my boys, which I wanted to do that. And I didn't want to miss out on their first word, their first steps. But parents aren't just dealing with these birds and bees situations anymore. We are facing some real decisions. I mean, even when you look at the education system, more parents today have pulled their kids out of public schools because over the last year, there have been, I think it's been exposed more, the public school system, of what it's really indoctrinating, how it's really indoctrinating our children. But they're having to make these decisions on whether or not we do homeschool, public school, private school. How do we have these conversations? If I send them to a public school, how do we deal with that? So we're talking about gender, sexuality, pronouns, identity, all of these things that parents, it kind of crept up on us if you're not sort of paying attention. I mean, I never in my lifetime, when my oldest was born, would have thought that one day we would be discussing the whole boy-girl issue and whether, and looking at this biological evidence and saying we have to now go in and talk about this, because it's just the culture is twisting this to be something that is confusing our kids and something that you can choose. So first off, I guess we're starting with a heavy hitting question. What advice do you have for moms with littles and then moms of teens, because we have probably two different conversations or ways to guide that conversation based upon age. And where do we start in that area?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things, especially with the whole boy and girl thing. We want to make sure that we are the ones that are introducing them to this concept first, and that we're also introducing it in terms of, I think we can use this idea of are you familiar with the concept of like remnant within theology, like all these different themes of a remnant? Is that familiar, or do you need...
I've heard, I know what remnant is as far as God always has a remnant, but as far as if it goes deeper than that, then no, I'm not sure.
Yeah, so just this idea that God always has a remnant. And so sometimes it's just he saves a group of people, but other ones it's like he really saves these people to be set apart. And I think that we can't start early enough with telling our kids we are to be set apart from the rest of culture. We can have community with them as much as we can, but there are certain parts of us and our family and our church that are going to be set apart. And so as long as they have this expectation that they're not always going to fit in with everybody else, I think that's one of the greatest gifts that we can give, because when you think you're supposed to fit in and you realize that you don't fit in, that's really confusing. That's kind of how I felt growing up. Like I was supposed to fit in, but I just didn't really. But kind of giving them that expectation of being other than in some ways. And it's because God has set us apart, and there's certain things in our identity. There's certain things in the way we behave, our moral code of conduct, what we believe, our ideologies that are going to be different from the rest of the world. So let's teach them to expect that. So as these things come up, across, and honestly, if your kids watch cartoons, they are getting all sorts of opportunities, but you have to be sitting there watching it with them if you're going to catch them. And so I would kind of phrase it as, this is one of the areas where our culture is different than us. This is what we believe that God has said about this. The culture is starting to say differently. And so you can just let them know that it exists when they're young. Now, when they get older, you can start talking about, is this logical? Do they have arguments that can really withstand scrutiny? And I would say from the amount of bluster that you get from, we'll just say, the really loud advocates, the louder and more yelling there is, the probably less someone has an actual argument. So we can start talking about just how God created things, how God created male and female to be together, why it's okay to have different interests. Every single thing I've watched, I can't remember, I don't know how many YouTube videos I've watched of people who talked about detransitioning, or who talked about when they came out to their families, as gay and lesbian, and all of them, almost all of them, have to do with, well, I never felt like I fit into what a girl was supposed to be, or I never fit in with what a boy was supposed to be. There was these rigid gender stereotypes that they realized that they didn't fit in with. And because they didn't fit in with that was their other. It wasn't their identity in Christ that made them other. It was their fact that they didn't do gender typical activities that made them other. And so they needed to find something that would explain that would make that okay. And so I think also starting with our kids, learn how God has created them. Look at what their skills are, what their interests are. Even if you have a boy that thinks makeup is interesting, he's looking at color. He's probably looking at color and contouring and stuff. So that artistic nature, we need to be just really encouraging our kids in the way God has created them, and showing them how they can bring those interests as a boy to their masculinity. They can bring their interest in sports and whatever it is as a girl. And we need to make sure that they feel comfortable being a girl or being a boy with the gifts and skills and interests that the Lord has given them. So those are some of the easy places that I think we can start. And then, of course, as the whole pronoun thing starts going in, we talk about what is the difference between objective truth and subjective truth, or a perception. What's the difference between perception and objective truth? And yeah, so we talk about that in the book, and we talk about like kind of what are some of the real big problems with this. We talk about it in chapter 7, which is the genderbread person chapter, and we talk about it, I believe, in chapter 11, which is the gender theory chapter in general. But getting them to see what things change and what things don't, because I think our culture is taking things that shift, such as like what I would call a tertiary identity, which would be interests and stuff like that, and making that primary identity, to which everything else around it has to then change in order to accommodate. So if like my masculinity or femininity changes based on what I'm interested in that day, or based on what clothes I feel like that day, that's going to be a really unstable and insecure identity.
Yes. You said something too about teaching them objective and subjective truth, even as they get older. And I think that's a great conversation to have. Maybe not use those terms when they're like 5, but you know what I'm saying? But that is the foundation of where we can ground all of these ideas and say, does gender change, or is this objective or subjective? Once they can begin to identify that, because we've lived in this culture of relativism for a long time.
Yeah.
So that's not new. To me, I feel like this whole taking on this whole gender topic is new, and because it seemed to come out full-fledged in the last like year and a half, something like that. But the whole topic of truth is not new. We should be grounding these conversations into the fact that there is objective truth and getting our kids to understand that. So I like that you pulled that out as well, because sometimes parents might be like, well, I don't even know what that is. Well, it's a great place for you to learn and then start to have the conversations. But if they read your books, you lay out all these definitions, all of these terms, and give them ideas. So yeah, I like that. I like that advice. Why is it important that parents take on these conversations and don't just say, I can skirt by this, ignore it, pass over it, maybe come back to it later, circle back or whatever, or just say, we'll leave it to the experts, or we'll leave it to the teachers at the schools?
Yeah. There's kind of a concept that I can't find the actual name of this concept. I've been told by the psychologists that I've approached asking them for a name for this concept, and they're all like, that's real. And yes, you're right. I don't know what that's called. And that is this idea that the first person to present an idea to you kind of becomes expert in your mind. Like I still remember certain things, like I wish I could get a hold of the old sermons that my pastor did on the evidence for the resurrection, the evidence for the New Testament documents, because it had such a huge impact on me. It was just paradigm shifting for me. So of course, he's the expert on this. He must have presented this in a way that I've never heard before. I bet you if anything, if I went back to his sermons, they would just be like all the other things. I mean, I've heard from Gary Habermas on this topic. I doubt that he did anything better than what Gary Habermas does. But still, in my mind, I filed him away as the expert. And that's something that a lot of people do. And so when you present something first, you then become the expert in your child's mind. And what happens is if we're trying to avoid these topics, I just had a dad this week that, even homeschooled their kids specifically because they didn't want to have them exposed to all these concepts. And yet then they had started, even maybe at their co-op, or I don't know where they were, started having their daughter being teased for her haircut and, for the relationship with her best friend. And she didn't know what to do. So she began Googling stuff and is all of a sudden now come out thinking that she's non-binary or that she's transgender. I can't remember all the details on it because it was just kind of a conversation that was happening. So we need to have the conversation first, number one, because we become the expert. And even if they're not ready for that conversation, we can just start to introduce, what have you heard about this? What have you heard about gender? Have you heard people talking about different genders? Oh, you haven't? Okay, well, when you do, if they start talking about that, just tell them, I'm going to wait to talk to my mom about that, and then come to me and we can talk about it. And so you're establishing, I already know about this stuff. It's out there. You're going to encounter it. And when you do, come to me. And you'd be surprised at how much kids are kind of willing and would prefer to talk to their mom about this. In this case, the girl didn't say anything. And so she went down digging into Google and doing who knows what and research, which brings us kind of to another problem, I think, especially with the gender thing, is that our kids have higher levels of anxiety than I think we've had in previous years. Just the mental health of our kids, it just from the nature of, I don't know what going on, but we're just seeing this trend of high anxiety, high depression sometimes. But even if it's not higher than in previous years, we at least kind of knew what to do with it. Right now, we have the enemy that's swooping in with all these YouTube videos saying, if you feel anxious, if you feel insecure, if you feel like you just don't feel comfortable in your own skin, then I'm going to provide you the reason for that. And that's going to be your savior out of this. And so if you read the book by Abigail Schreier called Irreversible Damage, she actually talks about this absolutely inflicting our girls that, I mean, puberty has always been hard on everybody. And it's for we women, good grief, when you get our hormones involved, boys kind of there's like two different kinds of crazies that happen during puberty. There's the boy crazy and there's the girl crazy, and they're different kinds of crazy. But it's like we explain to them their period, and we explain to them, all the mechanics of it, but we don't explain that you are going to feel like you are absolutely going insane because of these hormones. And so they're trying to find a way around this. They're trying to find a way, how can I escape these horrible feelings that I'm having? And we have all these YouTubes of people saying, if you feel like this, it's because you are not being true to your authentic self. Come, I will teach you how to now become who you were truly meant to be so that you don't feel this anymore. And once a kid gets locked in on this is the solution, it's like it is really hard unless they go and try the whole thing and discount all the evidence that they found on the internet. They're going to believe that that is the solution to their problem.
Exactly.
Unless you've talked about it first.
Yes. And a lot of times what I've heard, and even I've experienced this because like I told you before, I told my boys, me and my husband, we would make it a breakfast date right before they went to middle school. They were upper elementary, and we're like, it's time to have the sex talk. And we would take them, my oldest was first and the second. And then we recently did it with my youngest. But it's not like, yay, we get to go have the sex talk and this is going to be a great breakfast. It's kind of like, oh my gosh, this is weird. It's not weird. It's uncomfortable to bring it up.
You should just call it what it is. It's time for your awkward talk. It's time for our awkward breakfast together.
Exactly. And then after the breakfast, they're like, why did we do this? You've changed my childhood forever. And we would kind of laugh and we're like, yeah, we know, but this is how God designed sex. This is what you need to know. Your friends are going to be talking about it. Your teachers are going to want to talk to you about it. If you wait, I feel like if you wait until they're like 15 or 16, it's more awkward. It's like, and then you're a little bit late there because they're 15 and 16. They're not dumb. They've already heard these conversations. The schools are getting to them already. And so I feel like to take away or to ease that awkwardness, it's not going to take it away, to ease it a little bit, start when they're younger. And they're not going to be horrified when you sit them down and talk to them about it. And another thing that really comforts me as a mom is that parents, if you look up the statistics, and this has been this way, I remember interviewing for a teaching position years ago. It's like 11 years ago now. And they asked me, who's the most influential person in a child's life? Parents. And the principal kind of got upset. Well, what about the teachers? They're an influence, but they're not the most influential.
That's interesting that the principal got offended by that. That kind of tells you what they saw their role as being. Like, if you're offended that you're not more influential than the parents, I don't think you understand what you're doing here.
Exactly. And he even said, he's like, well, some children don't come from a family that provides, guidance. It doesn't mean it's a good influence. I didn't specify the type of influence. I said the parents are the most influential. We can still have a bad influence.
Oh yeah.
But you are the most influential. So with that being said, like you said, which fascinates me because I actually talked to parents in June of this year about talking to their kids on how to defend the faith, which is kind of hard to talk to people who don't know how to defend the faith in general. So you do a better job at laying out the groundwork and really simplifying it and then building it from there in those conversations, which does teach parents. But the scripture in Proverbs came to my mind when you said the study on they consider the expert whoever gets to them first, right? So Proverbs 18:17 says, in a lawsuit, the first to speak seems right until someone comes forward and cross-examines him.
That's good.
And so for me, it's like, if you don't get to your kids first because there's so much coming at them, and if something slips in through this way or that way, watch the second part of that verse until someone comes and cross-examines him. We need to set all of these bad ideas in that box, put it on trial, and we need to cross-examine it with truth, with the word, with the evidence. And we need to say, does this hold up? And if it doesn't, you're still the one coming in and telling your kids, hey, let's look at this. Let's evaluate this. Let's talk about it. And so some parents might think, oh, is it too late for me? Well, not according to that verse. Try to get there first. But if you don't, cross-examine those bad ideas. And hopefully your kids will be willing to listen. But then again, if you're the most influential person in their lives, then I think they're going to have a lot of say and it's going to carry a lot of weight. So one thing we do in my family.
Need to channel Amy here. There was this one piece of research that she did that she's brought up in a lot of the interviews that we talked about, which I think is great. It was this, she came across this thing called the Power to Decide campaign, where they were actually going and asking kids that were, I believe, like 13 to 19, who their biggest influences were on sexual issues, on their sexual decisions. And they had parents, friends, or social media. And for kids, I think it was 13 to 15, the parents won out. Like over 50% said parents were the most influential. And then even in the older ones, that was like, 16 to 19, it was still the parents that came in number one. It was a little bit lower. I think it was in the 30% range, and it was like real close with the friends. But they were, so from 13 to 19, parents are still, statistically speaking, the most influential on kids in their sexual decisions. It's not until they go to college that suddenly friends start to become more popular. And so the other thing that they did is they turned around and they started talking to the parents and asked them, how much do you think your kids listen to about, these topics? And a majority of the parents said the kids aren't listening. So what we have is we have a ton of kids who want to hear, who value their parents' opinion, who value their parents' thoughts, and a bunch of parents who think that their kids don't, and so they don't talk to them about it. So it's like the whole message of that was, your kids are listening, let's start talking.
Yes, that is so important, because we can just take ourselves out of the conversations and silence ourselves by assuming they're not listening when that's just not the case. And then what happens? All these other ideas are infiltrating and they're molding the minds of our kids, which shapes their worldview. And we talk about this a lot in my family, and my boys get so annoyed, because it's like, if we're watching a movie, we're listening to something, I'm like, okay, identify the worldview, guys. Where is this coming from? And they're like, can we just watch a movie, like without you pausing it to do apologetics or whatever?
You're my kids, so we get to do this every time.
Exactly. I'm like, do you pay the mortgage on this house? Are you paying the internet service? I don't think so. You will answer this question. No. So why is it important for parents to ensure their kids have a biblical worldview? And I know even with that worldview, the word worldview, we might be like, wait, what do you mean by worldview? And so maybe we need to talk about that, Hillary, as we talk about this question. But how do they develop that worldview? Like, first of all, what do they need to do to ensure? Why is it important? And then how do they develop the worldview so that culture isn't doing it, because culture is completely at odds with a biblical worldview?
Yeah. First off, I think we need to distinguish. This is another thing that Amy brought up when we were writing this book, the difference between teaching a biblical worldview and teaching from a biblical worldview. What we most often find is that parents and teachers, in Christian schools are all teaching from a biblical worldview, but they're not teaching the kids what a biblical worldview is. That would be, if I were to compare that to something, it would be like handing kids pieces to a puzzle, but they never see what the box top looks like. And we just assume like, oh, we know what this box top looks like. Oh, here's a piece of the barn. Here's a piece of that flower. Here's the cat's eye. Here, all the different pieces from, some puzzle with a cat in a barn and flowers. And so it's like, we understand where all these things go, but we don't realize that we're handing them to kids without them understanding the entire picture, the whole picture that they're creating. Because what we should have with a good worldview is an explanation for reality. So why are some things broken? Why are some things well designed? Why does it seem like some things aren't well designed? We have this entire worldview which starts with good creation, perfect creation, and then goes into the fall. And it's not just going to be the fall with people. It's going to be the fall with the world. And this is one of the things that I remember, this huge aha moment I had when I was, I think out in Santa Barbara, California. I was in photography school at the time, and the Veritas Forum came through. And I believe it was Michael Behe that might have been there, one of the very first things. And he was talking about the bacterial flagellum, and then like how it had turned into, I can't remember the details, but like, it basically went evil. And I thought it turned into a way to, what is it? So there's another variation on it where it like injects it like malaria or something. And I remember sitting in the audience and thinking, this is what sin, the effects of sin looks like on a biological level. And I had my mind blown, because it's like I always knew the effects of the fall, with sinful humans, but I never thought of what the natural evil effects of the fall would look like. And so we have so many explanations or so many examples of this, of we've got good design everywhere, but then we have also examples of things that have gone bad. And that would be living in a fallen world. That would be the infertility. That would be sickness. That would be birth deformities. That would be all these different things. So even though we see good design, we also see things that are deformed, that are maladapted, or just aren't what they were originally supposed to be. That can also be explained with the biblical worldview of creation and the fall. But then we go to redemption, where Christ came and he's starting to set things free and he's starting to set things right. And that's where we kind of go to when you say you have some things like when someone's struggling maybe with addiction, is how do I experience that redemption now by actually obeying God's design and still trying to, I don't know, live basically before sin entered the world. And it's a battle. It's a battle living the way that God intended for us to live. And there's so many things that come naturally that are at war with our spiritual person. And, Paul talks about this all the time. What I want to do, I don't do. What I don't do, don't want to do. That's the thing that I keep doing. Who's going to rescue me from this body of sin and death? That struggle with the fallen world, with our fallen natures and just fallen creation. And then finally, eternity, one day when everything is going to be made right. That's the part that we can't see, but that's the part where I think we're talking about what is our identity in Christ. That's the day that we're living for. And everything that we experience in this world can be explained by this really simple story of perfection, fall, and redemption. And so that's the whole biblical worldview, and where different things fit into that biblical worldview. That is what our kids need to be understanding how to do. So, but they can't just have little bits and pieces. They need to understand how it all works together and that it explains reality. Because that's one of the things that like all these different philosophies are trying to do, is saying we explain reality better than the biblical worldview. And they try to make sense of, things that come naturally. So they're trying to say that things that come naturally are automatically good. Have you seen this argument? Someone's born this way. This is how they were made. God doesn't make mistakes. Well, no, God doesn't make mistakes. But you know what? Sin can ravage this world. Like in the afterword in the Mama Bear Apologetics book, I have a bunch of maxims that I say to repeat to your kids till they want to gag. And one of them is, God made everything perfectly, but there's no limit to what sin can break.
Right.
And so, so that would be having that biblical worldview and saying what fits into this biblical worldview. What are people calling good? What are people saying this is a good design versus what does the Bible say is a good design and what we should be seeking? What's wrong with the world and what are we supposed to do to right what's wrong with the world? That would be another worldview question. And secular culture and Christianity have widely different explanations for that question.
So here's my, when we talk about a biblical worldview, my observation, because my teacher brain kicks in with this, because when I taught 5th grade students, I would inherit them all in August. They just got out of 4th grade. And then we'd run the assessments in math and different categories to see where they landed. So I knew what they knew and where I could pick up where the other teacher had left off, or, just to find out where their gaps were.
Yeah.
So if they were missing all of 4th grade, or maybe at least 3/4 of 4th grade, I knew I could not start with 5th grade curriculum, because I'm like, well, they're not going to grasp this. They're missing 3/4 of 4th grade. I see that with the biblical worldview in general. We see the statistic for Americans in the US is 65% claim Christianity. That's a claim. You can bubble anything in on a survey, right?
That's right.
And then you see 4%, according to Focus on the Family, did a study and they asked 10 questions, or I think it was 8 questions. And then they said they found that 4% of people who claim Christianity have a biblical worldview. So as a teacher, I'm thinking, how do you teach something you don't know? And I think that's where parents feel that inadequacy, right? Now, we wouldn't tell them, and I know you're not saying, go learn the Bible, then teach your kids. I mean, how do you simultaneously okay, I admittedly say I've been going to church, but I don't really know the Bible, and I don't really know how to talk about these things. How would you say for a parent who's struggling with that themselves, acknowledging and recognizing that they have these gaps in their knowledge and their learning, but then want to pass something on to their kids that they can navigate this world and help them? How do they close that gap with themselves while at the same time seizing the day with their kids?
Well, like in my opinion, and this just comes from me personally, the best way to learn something is to teach it. Like if there was a topic that I was like, I really want to understand this, I would go out and teach it. I learned this from when I got a job teaching chemistry. Chemistry was my absolute worst subject, both in high school and in college. I did not get it at all. I rued that. Like that's the only thing freshman year that made me cry was my chemistry. And especially the chemistry lab, because I'm just cursed when it comes to labs. And so when I had to teach that to a room full of kids, I had to understand that better than I ever did. And thank goodness for all the online things that I could do. I studied more for teaching that class than I ever studied for anything when I was in college, because I knew I didn't just have to understand the material. I'd have to understand where misunderstandings of the material would come from and the questions that would come from those misunderstandings, and be prepared in advance to answer those questions. So I would say find something that maybe you and your kids want to learn about. Maybe it is that you're wanting to learn about the biblical worldview. Start in on, there are some really great theology books out there. I can't think of any that are just like straight theology, but find a systematic theology book. Wayne Grudem, his book is super long. It's like 1,000 pages, but it was intended for high school students, I believe, originally. And so it's easy to understand language. So just start going through that. I think that teaching yourself is one of the best things you can do for your kids, because as you're learning, then you start asking them questions. Then you start talking to them about stuff. All these moms that I heard of, when they start studying stuff, they're like, it's amazing. Every time I start studying something, someone just asks me a random question that week that has exactly to do with what I'm studying. And I think the Lord is kind of faithful like that he brings these kind of little, I call them the lab portion of the learning. He brings these opportunities to put into play what it is that we're learning. There's something magical about talking things through. It's like if you just sit there and try to imbibe it and try to get it, into your brain, unless you're talking through it, it just doesn't stick as well. So I think the Lord is faithful for providing that. So that's kind of what Mama Bear aims to do, is we aim to teach the moms first, but then teach them how to break it down into kid language. And between those two things, I think we're getting some really empowered moms and we're getting some really equipped kids.
Absolutely. That's a great point. See, this should encourage every parent that's listening to be like, it's not too late. I can jump in right now today and I can do this. And you are so right. I mean, I remember having to coach volleyball and I'm like, what in the world are you asking me to coach volleyball? And I literally just stole some moves off of YouTube.
You're like, how do I score a goal in volleyball?
Exactly. Touchdown, right? No. And so, you take it out and the kids think you're a pro in the back of your mind. You're like, I'm winging it, but we got this, we got this. And you only get better as the days go by. And then, like you said, you are learning how to teach your kids. I think it's important that we teach our kids, hey, Christianity is an intellectual faith. Like we can ask questions and we can find these answers together. And if they know that you're on their team, that's going to make your family bond stronger and those kids are going to come to you. So that's a great answer, Hillary, because I did not prepare you for that and just kind of was something I was thinking of as we were talking. So I said before, I have 3 kids. They're not dating yet. Thank God. We made an age like you cannot date until you're, we said 16 and now I'm like, they haven't started yet. One's 18. Thank goodness, because I'm not even there. And I think 16 is just too young now that I passed that with one of my boys.
With the way things are going now, that is too young. But they may not even understand the concept of dating because you're dealing with hookup culture right now.
Exactly.
What's the difference between dating and hooking up, and are those the same?
Exactly. And I had mentioned on one of my podcasts not too long ago, one of my episodes, I was talking about how moms have this influence on their boys to become men because we can hold them back. We want to coddle and we want to hold on. And so it besides the father emulating what a man is and helping teach that, moms have a lot to do with helping their boys become men. But one of the things I said is if you set a standard in their dating life and help them set that standard, it will transfer over into setting that standard for marriage. And I think that's what we have to kind of think about when we teach our children how to face dating. But still, I don't know if that's a hard conversation to have. I just don't know if parents even know. Like you said, the culture has shifted. It's hookup culture now. What does that mean? How are they finding each other? It's not just hey, you want to meet at a movie on, Saturday night at 6. these are like, there's dating apps and everything else. So society places this emphasis on sex and have normalized it as part of dating. Like I've even heard where people are giving the advice of you have to have sex to see if you're sexually compatible. And it's like, that is, first of all, when you're talking to your kids about sex, or no one's going to be compatible for the first time. It's just, let's be real. I mean, compatibility really takes place after years into marriage when you've saved yourself for marriage and you're waiting. It's like, it's awkward. It's just not, if we're being honest, we don't want to turn this into a PG-13 podcast episode.
I know there's so many things I want to say. I'm like, nope, can't say that. Can't say that.
Yeah. But how do we talk to this? How do we guide them even in dating? And I like that you even disagreed with me on the 16 thing, because I'm second guessing. I told my husband the other day, or a couple weeks ago, was very, very close to, not too long ago anyways. And I was like, 16 is too young, because I see that they're just not ready for dating yet. So I think I need to increase that age with my other two. Mm-hmm. But besides that, how do you have this conversation with your kids? Because they're going to want to date.
Yeah. There's a concept that I go into in the Mama Bear Apologetics Guide to Sexuality that I feel really strongly about, that I just want every parent to understand this. And that's the idea of when our kids are learning, what they're doing is they basically have this mental file cabinet that they are putting things into. And one of the things that you find where kids, if there's something they just can't quite get, sometimes it's because they don't have the right file to put it in. They're not quite sure where it fits in with everything else. It feels like I don't know if you have one of those catch-all piles in your house where it's like, there's not a certain place where this belongs. So I'm just going to put it here with all the other stuff where I don't know where to put it. It's when you actually create a good file cabinet. A good file cabinet should have spots for everything. And what we have is our kids are misfiling, mislabeling things, miscategorizing ideas. And one of those, I think, in regards to sex, is with hookup culture. Sex is basically something you do with someone you like. Or it's something that dating people do. So it's like you pull open the file cabinet of their head and it's labeled things that people who are dating do. And sex is right there in there. And some of the things that we don't realize is that our kids have misfiled something. So I think getting those categories, explaining those categories up front, like I believe it's a chapter 1 that we talk about this category of things that are so powerful that they can create and destroy, or basically things that are so powerful that they need to be guarded because they can create and destroy. There's lots of things we can put in that category. That could be like really big dogs on a leash. That could be nuclear weapons. That could be prescription painkillers. There's a lot of things that are really powerful, that are so powerful that they need to be guarded, because if they are misused, you can really destroy stuff. That is the appropriate file for sex. It is so powerful and it's so special, and it's like we're elevating sex as to say this is not a mundane thing. This is so powerful and special that it needs to be guarded, because being used, it can create or it can destroy, and there's a lot of destruction that can have when it's misused. That's the category to create from when they're young, and that's the category to keep doing as they get older. And you don't have to talk about what exactly is happening with sex. You're just creating that category. Now, as they get older, they need to kind of know the mechanics of what's going on. But the category that I wish that I'd had in my head, that I kind of discovered in the process of writing this book, is really the definition of sex is a bodily recitation of the marital vows. It's this idea, if we look through the Old Testament, there are so many times when the Lord does something and then he wants them to have this ceremony or have a ritual that represents a covenant that he has made with them. And sex, we would say, is the same thing. There's a reason why, built into all these Jewish marriage cultures. Oh my gosh, I wish we could go back to Jewish marriage cultures, because it is so theologically rich. And it's of basically helping us understand the meaning behind sex. But I think even just that one little meaning, it's a married couple reciting their marital vows in bodily form. All of a sudden, hookup culture doesn't make sense, because it's all these people who you have not made marital vows with. And so you can't recite them. You can't point back to a promise that you've made, because you've never made a promise. And so no matter how strongly you feel about them, if you try to act like you're reciting a marital vow in bodily form, all I can get to is, I'm lying right now. I am lying because we never had this marital vow that we made that I'm pointing back to. For our kids that really do want to save sex for their marriage. I think just saying, oh, this is something that we do, we save sex for marriage, that doesn't give the why. I think this gives the why.
Yes. That's important. And I love that you said this gives the why. It's not a do as I say, because I'm your parent. I mean, I've always thought God, I was raised in a church where it was like, and I think a lot of Christians are, you don't question God, but God can handle our questions. And he tells us, if you eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, on the day that you eat of it, you will surely die. Why don't you eat from it? Because you're going to die. And they may not have completely understood and grasped that concept yet, because there was no way for them to understand it at the time, because they hadn't experienced it. But he still gave them the reason. And it's okay for us to tell our kids, this is the way that God designed it, and this is why we hold on to that until we get married, because they'll take that with them hopefully they won't get to the point where there's the heat of passion in the moment. Hopefully they won't get that far, and we can talk to them about making sure that they don't, but let's be realistic. It happens too, but they'll hold on to that in those moments, or more likely to hold on to them if you're grounding it into the reason why and what it will do and the effects of it if they don't have self-control and practice that. So
we're just going along with that category of things that we protect because they're so dangerous, like having a regular conversation with them. If they are dating someone, what are you doing to protect yourself from falling into this sinful action? And just because, remember, this is really powerful. It's really amazing. It's really powerful. And it's, meant to bind people together forever, but it's also meant to represent something. So what are you doing to protect it? And how can I help you protect it? Exactly.
And I know what some parents who are going to hear you say that, I know what they're going to think, because I get this pushback sometimes with my 16-year-old when I want to, especially like when I say, what's the worldview? Or, hey, you need to wear your seatbelt if you're going to drive to, I always remind him of his seatbelt, and he always probably wears it, but I'm his mom, right? So we're going to have these conversations. So you're going to be like, well, my kid's going to be like, Mom, why are you asking me? This is embarrassing. Here's my thing about a mom. Okay. There are just some conversations that are not off the table, and my kids know it right off the bat. So it's like, I'm your mother, and I will not allow this to happen without a conversation. You will live your life and you will become independent men, but you will never say, my mom didn't tell me, or my mom didn't sit me down and have a conversation with me. Yeah. So that's my motto, and that's my standard, and my boys know it. So I don't get a lot of pushback, because I've already warned them about that as they've been growing up.
I would say, I feel all of us have to stand before God one day and explain ourselves. And by God, your explanation will never be because my mom didn't tell me.
Exactly. There you go. Right there. That's it. And that's the way we fight for our kids, even if it's sometimes butting heads with them. How many times have you seen people grow up too, and then thank their moms, or even we can look back and say, gosh, I'm really glad my parents, even dads, I don't want to take them out of this, because there's a lot of things I look back on and say, man, I'm glad my dad, he was tough in those moments, but man, it made me who I am today.
It made me the person I am. Yep. Absolutely.
Exactly. And it's that whole, you won't thank me now, but you'll thank me later thing. It's really true. We know that, right?
Yep.
We hate it, but it's true. So my last question, chapter 6 of your new book, Mama Bear Apologetics Guide to Sexuality, you talk about the enemy's playbook. And this was one of my favorites, because I'm like, this is the enemy's tactics are his tactics. And he really doesn't change the way he does it. It just may be a new cultural topic, but he's still the same old enemy with the same tactics.
Yep.
But you said his playbook is surrounding the definition of words. And I feel like that's so important. So I wanted to talk to you about that. What do you mean by the playbook? And why is this battle surrounding the definition of words?
Yeah. So this is something where, for better or worse, one of the things that my brain just is always chewing on, and I'm trying to figure out, is I'm trying to find the root causes of stuff. It's like we can give all this explanation advice, but like, what's underneath stuff? And so I started really looking into this concept of what a hot mess identity is in our culture. And I'm thinking, what does it take in order to have an identity? In order to have an identity, you need truth and you need words, because you can't have a true identity without truth, and you can't convey a true identity without words. And we make decisions based on these identities. It's like the gospel itself is based on the true identities of mankind and the true identity of God coming back in relationship together. And so it's like I'm seeing as my pastor said, I was explaining this to him. He's like, "Oh, you're looking at the long game." I'm like, "Yes, this is the long game." Because, there's short game stuff where, the enemy might, sit your friend down next to you who's got some porn on his phone. That would be a short game of trying to tempt somebody. Now, the long game is going to be trying to undermine the very means we have of even understanding the situation. So what I see happening going with that is I find that because words are what we use to communicate to each other. And if we can confuse the words, there's just going to be confusion in general. It was a leader of a small group a long time ago that he used to say, if you wish to converse with me, first define your terms. And I think he said Voltaire was the first one who said it. Who knows who actually said it first? But there's something to be said about, like, let's make sure that we're talking about the same thing. In fact, just even in marriage, my husband and I discovered sometimes when we have the most our disagreements usually are around we'll be talking about theology stuff if we can't quite find that we agree. And after like lots and lots of bluster, we'll discover, we were talking about the same thing, but we were coming at it from different perspectives. That's a way of sowing discord. Now, what we have going on with, say, linguistic theft is that the enemy is taking words that basically have Judeo-Christian origin or meaning, or are highly understood by people with a Judeo-Christian background, and then changing the definition and then throwing that definition in the person's face and saying, you claim to follow Christ. Why aren't you following your own rules? So like the most obvious one would be the concept of love. When you see the phrase love is love, I need you to change that in your mind. What they're saying is sex.
Right.
This kind of sex is just as good as that kind of sex. That's what they're really meaning. Or just the concept of love as being affirming me as a person. Yeah, we need to be supportive of our friends, but affirming everything, even an identity that doesn't go along with reality. I mean, that's affirming something that's not true according to their definition of love. Those have to exist. You have to affirm everything in me or you hate me. Those are your only options. They have redefined the concept of love, or we've redefined the concept of justice. This is a huge one right now. And one of the things I thought was really interesting is when I was looking in the Greek with justice, the word for justice and the word for righteousness are the same word. And the same thing, it's true also for injustice and unrighteousness. So justice and righteousness are so intertwined that they are the same word. But yet we have people fighting for justice, and they're fighting for the right for people to behave wickedly. Now, I'm not saying that we need to have a society that, is based on a theocracy. That's what it was. Israel had a theocracy where God was the one that was in charge of everybody. We do not live in a theocracy. Therefore, we don't have to make all our Christian convictions into laws. That's okay. But we don't want to have our Christian kids thinking that they're pursuing the greater good, that they're pursuing love, they're pursuing justice, and they're pursuing truth by arguing for justice to be done in areas where unrighteousness is happening. Like if we think of the concept of reproductive justice, that's saying that a man has the right to not have to carry a baby in his body. Therefore, a woman should have the right to not carry a baby in her body. And in order for things to be just and equal between them, she needs to have the right to kill her unborn child in utero. And that's reproductive justice. True justice will never involve the right to wickedness. And that doesn't mean that we need to even treat people differently based on if they have performed wicked deeds, that we are all made in the image of God. And this is another thing that I advocate really instilling in your kids as young as they can talk, is the dignity and respect that we pay to all people who are made in the image of God. And everywhere you go, especially when they're young, if you see a clown, if you see a homeless person, if you see someone who is in a wheelchair or someone who's missing a limb, someone who's missing their teeth, ask, are they created in the image of God? And the answer is always yes. And so we are not denying people's inherent worth, but there's a sense of justice that has been perverted, and it's making our kids think that they are fighting the way the God of Israel, the God of Israel and Jacob, and the God of Christianity, they are fighting and crusading for the misfits and the downtrodden and the oppressed in the way that Jesus would do. But when you look at what is actually going on, it's things that would be abhorrent to God.
Right. And that's the thing. It always sounds good because of the words they're using, but they're not using them in the way that they're truly being defined by, well, you could take it back to even a biblical worldview, like you said. And that's the enemy's tactic. Look at Genesis 3. It's always been with words.
Mm-hmm.
And, he used words against Eve. God's words twisted them. And then, it also fascinates me when you look in, I think it's a book of John when Jesus, I think it's two places in the Gospels when Jesus is going through the wilderness and the enemy knows the word and he comes in, he uses it against Jesus and Jesus has to use the word back. It's like, but Jesus uses it in the way to withstand the enemy, and the enemy uses it in a way to twist it and manipulate what he would hope to be an outcome that, he wanted Jesus to throw himself down off this cliff. It's the same tactic, but it's a different culture, which is a different topic. So we don't recognize it as easily.
And if you look at those, in all of them, he is challenging identity. He is saying, is God, he is challenging the goodness of God in the Garden of Eden and the rightful role and identity of man. Should you have the right to do this? And then you go to, if you look at when he's challenging Jesus, it's if you're the Son of God. He's got that, if your identity is what it is. And so he's challenging truth, he's challenging identity, and he's twisting words.
Yes. And I noticed too in John the Baptist when I was studying the book of John, I think it's in John chapter 1 and 2, where he's, he prepares the way of the Lord. And the Pharisees came and challenged his identity and says, so why are you baptizing? Who gave you the right? Are you Elijah? Are you one of the prophets? And so at the core of it, it's always, like you said, our kids are being challenged. It's their identity. They're trying to figure out who they are and who God's created them to be. And at the same time, the enemy, the world, like you said, love is love. That sounds great on the surface. But if you're not looking deeper, we're going to miss what that truly means. And our kids think they're fighting for something great. They're fighting for these things that we need to restore the justice to our society or whatever. And if we're not teaching them from, like you said, a biblical worldview, we're missing it and they're missing it. And they're actually upholding these things that are going to have huge consequences on society and already are in a lot of ways. So very good points, Hillary. I appreciate all that you have to say. You are very insightful. And for somebody who, like you said, has not had her own children, you sure do speak to right in the feelers of what moms are going to. And you really help equip us. And I can't say how much that you are appreciated. I know one day when we all get to heaven and our kids are there with us, standing by our side, we all will look to you and say, thank you for the role that you played in helping equip us to equip our kids. So I appreciate that very much. Can you tell us how to find you and where to follow you if they don't already? Like I said, I've mentioned you so many times on my podcast.
Yeah, so we're kind of on a lot of the socials. We're not on TikTok just because I'm not ready to go down that rabbit hole. But you can find us on Facebook, Mama Bear Apologetics. We kind of have several of our mama bears that take care of certain social medias. So even though technically we're on Twitter, I think that's like the wash basin of the world. That's where, good thoughts go to die. But Amy likes Twitter. So you can follow us on Twitter. You can follow us on Instagram. That's the one that I enjoy just because there's lots of small clips and videos of cute animals. So on days when I'm feeling particularly run down and beat down by all the research that I'm doing, I can go watch a pig getting a bath. So so we're on Instagram, or you can go to our just webpage, mamabearapologetics.com. And that's mama spelled M-A-M-A. We get all sorts of funky spellings of mama, even with people who are like, it's a picture of the book and then they say mama and it's spelled totally differently than the book. I'm like, you've got the book right there. You've got the picture. So anyway, yes, M-A-M-A. You can find us anywhere there and you can contact us through the website's the best place to contact us through because I can just take it and I can forward it to the appropriate person. If you contact us on social media, it's a lot more different because I can't just forward it to the appropriate person. So yeah, there's a contact page on the Mama Bear page.
There you go. All right. Well, if you're listening, go ahead and connect with Hillary. I subscribe to their newsletter, so you're going to want to do that. They give freebies here and there for how to talk to your kids about Halloween and different things like that. So you don't want to miss it. Also, if you have not read the first Mama Bear Apologetics, I obviously can't say enough about it. I do have and am reading Mama Bear Apologetics Guide to Sexuality, Hillary's new book. I believe that your books are like the number one selling apologetics books or something in your category. And that right there says a lot about the need for this topic and for moms wanting to be equipped and to teach their kids how to defend the faith. So Hillary's doing great work. Support her ministry, and I hope to catch you on the next one.